I am going to be reading to you from Nonviolent Communication by Marshall Rosenberg. I was raised in a Catholic tradition where a lot of the language that was used to try and influence people and sort of have one's needs met was a lot of judgment language. That's right, that's wrong, that's sinful, that's bad, that's good. That's a mortal sin, that's a venial sin. A lot of very large concepts, sometimes for seemingly small things, like pray to God about if you're supposed to go to such and such this weekend, because you can't know if that's something that you're allowed to do, yada yada. Anyway, in high school, as that story was losing its resonance and was failing to meet a lot of my own inner needs and all sorts of turmoil and lots of story there, I found myself without a language internally that felt consistent for describing those kinds of things that I still had the need to describe. So I'd be sitting here feeling frustrated or angry or hurt, but I didn't have a language to describe what was going on. I didn't have language that I'm using right now. So often when I'd find myself in a loud conflict, and this is generally like between me and my dad, because I didn't have many friends or other conflict situations with me and my dad, or me and internally, I didn't have a language. I would just sort of withdraw, get quiet, or get very loud and shouty, and just sort of bumping up against trying to figure things out. In 2010, I visited Dancing Rabbit Eco Village with my friend Jess and my brother John, and they mentioned that they used some of the principles in this book in the way that they wanted to communicate with members of the community and in meetings that they would hold for decision making, and that they just were led by some of the principles in the book. And I just in hearing them describe some of the ideas, I was like, ooh, I feel like there's some good stuff here. And then in just beginning to read the book, it was like, oh, it was just like fish getting into water type sensation of like, oh, thank you for giving me the words, the words that I need. And I didn't even finish the book, and I didn't practice a lot, but it was a seed that was planted, and it started giving me some infrastructure, some framework on which I could, in certain situations, be like, okay, let's break it down, and I can give myself some empathy and figure out what I'm feeling, what I'm needing, what I'm wanting. And other people might not have that language, but I could give it to myself, and I could begin offering it to others. And now, just as a formality and an enjoyment for myself, I'm going to read to you from Marshall Rosenberg's Nonviolent Communication. And see how far I get in this video, and then maybe I'll pick it up again later. At the top it says, if violent means acting in ways that result in hurt or harm, then much of how we communicate could indeed be called violent communication. Nonviolent communication, a language of life. Empathy, collaboration, authenticity, freedom. The overlapping space between these sort of dialogue bubbles. Third edition. Words matter. Find common ground with anyone, anywhere, at any time, both personally and professionally. By Marshall B. Rosenberg, Ph.D. Forward by Deepak Chopra. Endorsed by Tony Robbins, Arun Gandhi, Marianne Williamson, John Gray, Jack Canfield, Dr. Thomas Gordon, Rianne Eisler, and others. I do not feel like reading through all of what people are saying about nonviolent communications. There's people from the business world who have found it useful in their business. people from the communication world. Jack Canfield, Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins. Dr. Rosenberg has brought the simplicity of successful communication into the foreground. No matter what issue you're facing, his strategies for communicating with others will set you up to win every time. Online reviewers. Conflict Resolution by William Ury. Getting to Yes. Nonviolent communication is one of the most useful processes you will ever learn. John Gray. Men are from Mars, women are from Venus. You'll learn simple tools to diffuse arguments and create compassionate connections with your family, friends, and other acquaintances. Diana Lyon, Buddhist Peace Fellowship, Turning Wheel Magazine. Rosenberg describes how in numerous conflicts, once, quote, enemies, have been able to hear each other's needs, they're able to connect compassionately and find new solutions to previously impossible impasses. If you want to learn ways of more skillful speech, I highly recommend this clear, easy-to-read book. From the education world, from the health, healing, and self-care world, from people talking about using it in intimate relationships and parenting, family communication, for personal growth. From people who work in prisons, for people who are connected to how it connects on a spiritual level to its therapeutic basis. Anyway, lots of quotes. Table of contents. I'm not going to read all of this, but the chapter headings. You can do the chapter headings. Chapter 1, Giving from the Heart. Chapter 2, Communication that Blocks Compassion. Chapter 3, Observing Without Evaluating. Chapter 4, Identifying and Expressing Feelings. Chapter 5, Taking Responsibility for Our Feelings. Chapter 6, Requesting That Which Would Enrich Life. Chapter 7, Receiving Empathically. Chapter 8, The Power of Empathy. Chapter 9, Connecting Compassionately with Ourselves. Chapter 10, Expressing Anger Fully. Chapter 11, Conflict Resolution and Mediation. Chapter 12, The Protective Use of Force. Chapter 13, Liberating Ourselves and Counseling Others. Chapter 14, Expressing Appreciation in Nonviolent Communication. And there's an epilogue, a bibliography, an index, and resources at the back, and about the author page. Foreword by Deepak Chopra. No one deserves our gratitude more than the late Marshall Rosenberg, who lived his life just as the title of one of his books states, Speak Peace in a World of Conflict. He was keenly aware of the maxim, or warning, that's contained in the subtitle of that book. What you say next will change your world. Personal reality always contains a story, and the story we live, beginning from infancy, is based on language. This became the foundation of Marshall's approach to conflict resolution, getting people to exchange words in a way that excludes judgments, blame, and violence. The contorted faces of protesters on the streets that make such disturbing images on the evening news are more than images. Each face, each shout, each gesture has a history. Everyone clings to their history with a vengeance because it anchors their identity. So when Marshall advocated peaceful talk, he was advocating a new identity at the same time. He fully realized this fact, as he states about nonviolent communication and the role of the mediator in this new third edition. We're trying to live a different value system while we are asking for things to change. In his vision of a new value system, conflicts are resolved without the usual frustrating compromises. Instead, the contending parties approach each other with respect. They ask about each other's needs. In an atmosphere free of passions and prejudices, they reach a connection. Gazing on a world rife with war and violence, where us versus them thinking is the norm, and where countries can break all bonds of civilized existence to commit unbearable atrocities, a new value system seems far away. At one European conference for mediators, a skeptic criticized Marshall's approach as psychotherapy. In popular language, isn't he asking us simply to forget the past and just be friends? A remote prospect, not just in the war-torn areas, but in any divorce case? Value systems are packed in the luggage of every worldview. Not only are they inescapable, but people are proud of them. There's a long tradition around the world of prizing and fearing warriors at the same time. Jungians tell us that the archetype of Mars, the volatile god of war, is embedded in everyone's unconscious, making conflict and aggression inevitable, a kind of inherent vice. But there's an alternative view of human nature, eloquently expressed in this book, that must be considered because it's our only real hope. In this view, we are not our stories. These stories are self-created fictions that remain intact through habit, group coercion, old conditioning, and lack of self-awareness. Even the best stories collaborate in violence. If you want to use force to protect your family, guard yourself from attack, fight against wrongdoing, prevent crime, and engage in a so-called good war, you have been co-opted by the siren song of violence. If you decide to opt out, there's a sizable chance that society will turn on you and exact retribution. In short, finding a way out isn't easy. In India, there's an ancient model for nonviolent living known as ahimsa, which is central to the nonviolent life. Ahimsa is usually defined as nonviolence, although its meaning extends from Mahatma Gandhi's peaceful protest to Albert Schweitzer's reverence for life. Do no harm would be the first axiom of ahimsa. What so impressed me about Marshall Rosenberg, who passed away at 80 just 6 weeks before I write this, is that he grasped both levels of ahimsa, action and consciousness. The actions are well described in the following pages as principles of nonviolent communication, so I won't repeat them. To be in ahimsa consciousness is much more powerful, and Marshall possessed that trait. In any conflict, he didn't choose sides, or even care primarily what their stories were. Recognizing that all stories lead to conflict, either overtly or covertly, he focused on connections as a psychological bridge. This is in keeping with another axiom of ahimsa. It's not what you do that counts, it's the quality of your attention. As far as the legal system is concerned, a divorce is over once the two parties settle on how to split their assets. But this is far from the result that's reached emotionally between the two divorced parties. Too much has been said, to use Marshall's wording, that changed their world. Aggression is built into the ego system, which totally focuses on I, me, and mine whenever conflict arises. Society pays lip service to saints and their vow to serve God instead of themselves, but there's a huge gap between the values we espouse and the way we actually live. Ahimsa closes this gap only by expanding a person's awareness. The only way to resolve all violence is to give up your story. No one can be enlightened who still has a personal stake in the world. That could be the third axiom of ahimsa. But this seems like a teaching as radical as Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount when he promises that the meek shall inherit the earth. In both cases, the point isn't to change your actions, but to change your consciousness. To do that, you must walk a path from A to B, where A is a life based on the incessant demands of the ego, and B is selfless awareness. To be frank, nobody really desires selfless awareness. From the viewpoint of looking out for number one, it sounds at once scary and impossible. What's the payoff if you depose the ego, which is all about payoffs? Once the ego is gone, do you sit around passively like a spiritual beanbag? The answer lies in those moments when the personal self falls away naturally and spontaneously. These occur in moments of meditation or simply deep contentment. Selfless awareness is the state we're in when nature or art or music creates a sense of wonder. The only difference between those moments, to which we can add all experience of creativity, love, and play, and ahimsa is that they flicker in and out, while ahimsa is a settled state. It reveals that stories and the egos that fuel them are illusions, self-created models for survival and selfishness. The payoff for ahimsa isn't that you upgrade the illusion, which is what the ego is always striving to do with more money, possessions, and power. The payoff is that you get to be who you really are. Higher consciousness is too lofty as the term for ahimsa. Normal consciousness is more accurate in a world where the norm is so abnormal that it amounts to psychopathology. It's not normal to live in a world where thousands of nuclear warheads are aimed at the enemy and terrorism is an acceptable religious act. They are merely the norm. For me, the legacy of Marshall's lifelong work doesn't lie in how he revolutionized the role of the mediator, valuable as that was. It lies in the new value system he lived by, which in truth is quite ancient. Ahimsa has to be revived in every generation, because human nature is torn between peace and violence. Marshall Rosenberg gave proof that entering this state of expanded awareness was real, and when it came to settling disputes, very practical. He leaves footprints that the rest of us can follow. If we have true self-interest at heart, we will follow. It's the only alternative in a world desperately seeking wisdom and the end of strife. I think I'll stop there. After Marshall died, I never got to meet him personally, but I was aware of his existence before he died. And after he died, there was an extensive, multi-day long online conference call set up where people had the opportunity to hold like the talking stick and share about their experience with Marshall, and to have someone else reflect and give them empathy, and to have other people in the call be sort of in a fishbowl observing and holding them in that sort of presence of loving non-judgment, and to be witnesses and to see them. And it went on for so long, and it was so beautiful. I Yeah, I'd never seen anything like that. Talk about like new forms of life. That kind of gratitude sharing after someone passing. It's like, yes, now there is a memorial. I look forward to finding out more about both how that came to be, like who was involved in it, and like the technical aspects, but also just seeing more of that kind of gratitude and celebration and sharing of and celebration of others, and before they pass away. I wish we had done that for him before he died. I think he would have uh, probably would have been a bit overwhelming, but I think he would have enjoyed it. Okay, I'll probably pick this up. At least I like the idea of picking it up and getting into the meat of the text. Lots of stories that Marshall shares, and he's a lovely man. A lot of his work, if you're interested, is lots of videos on YouTube, and many people influenced by his work, continuing doing work today. I hope you look into them if you're interested. Take care. Bye.